I'm Corbett Wall with DV Auction, here with your feeder flash for Tuesday, May the 25th, brought to you in part by YTEX Tags. Cattle producers have learned to trust for both one-piece and two-piece tags, YTEX. Nitty Griddy, and I think that's one of the best titles that I've come up with in a long time for one of these reports, but I want to talk to you guys a little bit about the grid and how fat cattle are sold on the grid. And I've told you guys many times, and in my talks that I've done, if you went to one of them and heard that negotiated grid is the second best way to sell your cattle, right after negotiated cash, and it's all about that negotiation. The fact is there's very little actual negotiated grid out there. You see pockets of negotiated grid. Northern Missouri has negotiated grid. Some of eastern Iowa gets some negotiated grid where you get to haggle around on your base price for choice, basically. And it's not really that great of a gimme deal. Normally they pick a pocket where it's hard to get the full market, and they give you, the top of the regular market for the choice. And then you get to stand any premiums and discounts from there. But basically, just a straight up grid, and that's the way packers like to buy the balance of their cattle, the ones they don't have a formula deal with, is basically just selling them on the rail. And I'll never forget, one of my dad's favorite sayings was, the only difference between having your cattle stolen and selling them on the rail is, if you sell them on the rail, you have to pay the freight. If they're stolen, somebody else picks the freight up there. But I think a lot of people, and I'm going to step on some toes here, and you guys know that I've got big feet and I smash toes all the time. It's not a big deal to me. But a lot of people think that they're part of the solution selling on the grid. It's not part of the solution. And the packers are trying to steer you into selling more cattle on the grid all the time. And it's basically, they just give you what they want you to have. And they know, and they feed off of cattle feeders' pride and their competitiveness. And they know that they can count on those two things. So when you're on a grid deal, well, how'd your grid deal go? I don't really know, but it's going to be good. They're going to take care of me. They told me how good my cattle were, and it gave me a big fuzzy right up under my belly there, behind my ribs there. It gave me that big fuzzy. And then whenever they get their paperwork back, it says right at the top that your cattle brought back $3 more than your neighbor's cattle that just sold straight up negotiated cash. And man, there comes that competitiveness, and and everybody says, oh, I plus the market, and they're just so tickled, and then they turn on the feeder flash, and they don't even listen to the part where I tell you where packers could be paying $2 a pound live weight for cattle and still make money. And but you had some cattle bring back 123 or 124 on the grid, and you got that big warm fuzzy, as you're losing all your equity and going broke. And that's what they feed off of. And they just want to buy those grid cattle all the time. Listening to conversations already this week, and I tell you guys, every week, what's the first thing they do? Same thing my old buddy Sonny Jobs did in the hog yard. Is whenever he's getting control of the market, he tells everybody he's full. And then all of a sudden they're in a desperate position. It makes them in a desperate position. A desperate position is no way to negotiate, but that's the way they do. And so I hear these guys saying, well, I'd like to send some cattle to this plant over here. They're paying steady money with last week, but they can only buy a few hundred per buyer, and then they're going to pull those back, and I can't sell any negotiated cash cattle at all to this plant over here. They're full, going all the way to the end of June. They're full. They can't take anything. Oh, but if I want to grid them, oh, they'll take all the grid cattle I want to send them, because they have special hooks in there, some for the negotiated cash cattle, and those are very, very hard to come by, those hooks, but they got a whole lot of the grid hooks, and we can fill those up. Give me a break, guys. Getting you guys to have that warm fuzzy feeling about that grid is what's keeping us from getting this minimum negotiated cash trade. If we had minimum negotiated cash trade and we had competitiveness in there, and these packers that just sit back and wait for you to promise your cattle to them, they would have to get up to up to their shoulder to the wheel and hit the road, start driving, looking for guys that's got cattle for sale. We could move this market higher. What do you want? You want to plus your neighbor $3 or $4 on a grid, or do you want that base price to be $20 or $30 higher? You want to sell them in a negotiated manner and feel like you got a pair of nuts under you whenever you get done selling them, and you've done something for the good of humanity. That's what we've got to get, guys. And that's the biggest gripe we have whenever we're talking about getting a minimum negotiated cash. Well, if you guys get that percentage too high, then they're not going to be able to buy my cattle on the grid, and my cattle are so much better than yours that I really need that grid because I've got superior cattle. Yeah, it might bring a little bit more. How much more did they cost you in the first place? How much more did those all naturals cost you to keep them that way? You know who makes money on the grid? People that feed junk. The same people that make money all the time feeding cattle. People that feed absolute junk. They love the grid too, Hey, I got some used roping steers over here I picked up for 28 or 30 cents as feeders. They fed for nothing. I fed them junk. They were junk. And those cattle will make money, And, we've got to get this thing. We've got to be thinking about getting a negotiation in some competitive manners here. Let's look at the Cowboy math. I had one of my respondents say, hey, let's get another look at this Cowboy math. You guys take a look at this. Pause it if you need to. Write it down, whatever. But you look at what these packers are making right now. So, and this is basically on a grid type of a deal here, but you look at your quality grades up on the top on the left, your prime, choice, select, standard, or no roll, and you look at choice, which is everything revolves around choice. 327.83 is what choice box beef cutout value was to end the day on Monday, okay? Kind of a typical deal, get 10 over on the prime, so there's that. Your select is what it quotes at 303.39, and then your standards are 50 back of the choice. So you take that 50 back. Now let's take an average load of cattle, average cattle all over the country here. Your average percent grading nationwide is right there in the middle. So you've got, cattle on the average, about 12% of them are grading prime. Unbelievable. Back when we had humans standing there grading those cattle, it was always about 2 or 3%, maybe up to 5 once in a while. But 12%. That also has a lot to do taking these cattle to these, rhinoceros weights. But choice cattle, 71% choice. Select, just a few more select cattle on a typical load than there is prime. 13.74%, and then just about 3% of the cattle are standards or no rolls there. Okay, so you take those values and you shift them across there, you multiply those out, and then you get on a typical load of cattle, or on what typical cattle are, you get an average pricing on those of $324.18 a hundred on a typical load of cattle there. That's a dress price. You take that times your dressing percentage, which is typical about 63.5. Live price on a typical set of cattle, or typical cattle nationwide, live price on what your packers are getting for that product should be almost 206 live weight. 205.85 right there. Okay, you take, let's say that steer just weighed 1,400 pounds. Let's take him for the 5 area weighted average. 119.72 is what it was last week. I'm in the middle towards the bottom there. $1,676 per head. Now let's take what your packers could be giving you for that 1,400 pound steer. 205.85. That's $2,882 per head. You take the difference between that. There's $1,206 per head that your packers are making on typical cattle nationwide. Typical cattle, typical load of cattle, that's what your market is. That's what they're making on an average deal. Now they'd have better deals than that for sure, but $1,206 per head. And then I always hear the guy say, well, they can't do all that work for nothing. Okay, now go to the bottom left there. Your drop value, your hide and your guts. You figure that 1,325 pounds on the average times a whopping $11.61 for your drop value. That's $153.83 a head that they get for the offal. Typical kill costs on a big plant normally run about $125 a head. So they're picking up another $25 to $30 a head right there. And you guys are feeling sorry for them and falling for their big deal about, using your pride and your competitiveness against you. It's sickening. What happened to the cattle on feed report? Pretty much just blew over. Yeah, your live cattle were down some, but that didn't have anything to do with the cattle on feed. You would have thought that the cattle on feed meant anything. It would have been down on your out front feeder cattle futures. It wasn't. So it's just too hard to compare when we were in that black swan, the worst of the pandemic a year ago. So it didn't work too good. I want to talk to you guys a little bit about the CARES Act. That's the deal they've got in Colorado, where these PETA people have coming in there and saying that reproductive management of your herds is sexual molestation. It's really ridiculous. If you palpate your cows, if you AI your cows, if you castrate your calves, if you do that, that's sexual molestation. Okay, they've got that on the ballot, guys. That's what's scary. Now, that they did kind of screw up when they did their ballot initiative, that they didn't have it in a single title. And that's a thing in Colorado there. Instead of asking for just one thing, they're asking for multiple things, and they think it's going to confuse people on a ballot type deal. So now it's in the courts dealing with that single title. But they're likely going to win that, or they're going to change the wording on that. And not this November, but next November, that's going to be on the ballot, whether or not we should, approve this CARES Act and you basically outlaw reproductive management of your cattle. That'll completely wipe out cattle production. What also included in there is cattle get to live out 20% of their life, and they've got you're not going to be able to slaughter cattle until they're 5 years old. That'd be pretty good eating there, wouldn't it? So basically, this would annihilate cattle production in Colorado. And you think, well, Colorado's a nut job deal anyway. All they do is sit around and smoke dope. Yes, I don't disagree with you, but once we get that in Colorado, then it's going to New Mexico. They're just one tick better, or half a tick maybe. And then it's going to start spreading to other states and other states and other states. It's going to set a precedent. And if it gets on that ballot, we don't have a prayer. And you think, there's not that many stupid people in Colorado. Yes, there are. The predominantly stupid. If you haven't been there for a while, get out and drive around, walk around with those hikers and those idiots. But it doesn't matter where you go. There's a lot of stupid people whenever you get to talking about livestock and things like that. They have no comprehension at all. They didn't have a grandpa and uncle whose farm they grew up on. Their parents didn't, and maybe even their parents didn't. So they have no conception of what we're talking about here. When that deal comes up on the ballot, we're going to lose. There ain't enough normal people, understanding people in this country, and in the places in Colorado, in Springfield and Lamar and La Junta and places like that, there's not enough people to outrun all those nuts in Denver and Grand Junction and places like that. So they're gonna lose. And some people are saying, oh, they can come back and they'll do it at a local level. They'll make it where they can't control it. I don't know what we got to do, guys, but we've got to get after this deal as much as we're after minimum negotiated cash or anything. And if anybody's got any ideas, we've got to get after this CARES Act deal. Let's talk about your board to open the week. June live cattle futures down 92 cents at 116.75. August down 82 at 120.10. Go on your back months of live cattle down 15 cents to down 77. Just kind of downer on your commodity of cattle there, your live cattle. Commodities were down pretty good. Feeder cattle was better. Now your spot May feeder cattle contract was down. Why? Because it's got converse with your index levels, and it's been running at a premium. Your index levels came up a little bit, or your real-time index did on Monday, and so they're going to kind of come together here in the next few days, but we're at the end of the month. They've got to come to a conversion there. 136.27, that's better than what your index level is. August, though, as you get on your back months, they were all mostly higher. August up 42 cents, your all-important August. I talked about that on the last visit. August feeder cattle contract is the most important feeder cattle contract there is. We need some support on it. We had some more on Monday, up 42 at 154.12. Going to back months, your feeder cattle unchanged to up 80 cents. Look at your grains real quick. New crop December corn down 6 1/4 at 5.40 1/4. A lot of your big analysts that look at the charts and the numbers think that we've already put our top in for corn. Now we're kind of going to ease off a little bit. So we got to hope that's true, but it's still going to be just a weather market until we get things start tasseling out. How about November beans new crop up 1 3/4 cents, which is nothing as volatile as it's been lately, but $13.62 1/4 cents per bushel there on new crop beans. Let's talk about your weighted average on last week's negotiated fat cattle trade in your 5-area feeding region. 69,300 head. Better movement, about 10,000 better than we had the previous week at 59,400. And a year ago, the same week, 66,200 head. Live steers and heifers ranged in price from 118 to 121 1/4, but mostly 119 to 120. A lot of people say those are charity bids. I don't disagree, but your weighted average on live steers was 119.72. That was down 1 penny per hundredweight. So in other words, exactly steady. Easy to keep those charity bids steady, especially when nobody's bucking you on them. But your markets were, on the price trends were a little bit unevenly steady, but basically exactly the same market as we had the week before. Dressed steers and heifers 188 to 193. Weighted average on dressed steers 190.58. That was up 9 cents per hundredweight, so basically steady there too. Nationwide, we had only 82,200 head of negotiated cash sales compared to 265,800 head of formula sales. Of those 82,000 negotiated cash sales, almost 30%, about 29% of those were for the 15 to 30 day delivery. So continue to set you up there. We did even have a few cattle trade in Iowa and Nebraska, just a few loads there from 119 to 120 and a little bit of 190 dressed. Box beef cutout values, I gave you those whenever we did the Cowboy math, but Monday afternoon, your choice cuts 327.83, up another $2.66. Memorial Day is a week from Monday, guys, a week from today, or yesterday. And then they're still on the rise. Unbelievable. Select 303.39 up 108. If you ordered some today, there's no way they could have it at your place of business or your grill by next Monday or next weekend, or this coming weekend, I guess I should say. What else is going on? Going to be starting broadcasting of Hummiston Livestock Exchange in Hummiston, Iowa. Yeah, that's why we do all this. We're in the broadcasting of real-time auction business here. We're also in the advertising business, but we welcome every new customer to DV Auction. Tell you what, I'm going to be hearing a lot more from Hummiston Livestock Exchange. You think, well, if I broadcast with you, do you talk about my market more? Yeah, probably will. Yeah, no doubt. Although we will talk about markets that don't broadcast with you, because we want to give everybody the full gamut. And on top of anything, what we do right here at Feeder Flash is we promote the auction way of selling cattle. How about your feeder cattle market, your real-time index on DV Auction? Late in the day on Monday at 135.73, up $1.05 from the end of last week's trade, which is a pretty good gain there. And like I said, it's coming together with your spot made feeder cattle. Big sales on Monday. How about the Oklahoma National Stockyards in Oklahoma City? 8,600 head. Good sale. Feeder steers $1 to $4 higher. Feeder heifers $4 to $6 higher. Calves were not well tested, but a higher undertone on those that sold. Talked to Scott McCormack with National Livestock. He told me about a big string of heifers that come in feeding type heifers, but I mean the right kind, from a good friend of his there. Buy these cattle light, background them on wheat, and the cattle just come off the wheat and we're in good condition. Now I'm going to give you some black strings. Cattle were mostly black when they put them together, but you're going to get some colored ones. But 269 head of the all black heifers weighed $692 at $137. It's a big time price on feeder heifers. Then the 3 colored cattle, which if you know what that means, solid colored type cattle, oaky type cattle, colored up a little bit. 64 head of those, comparable weight, 687 pounds, $130, so about $7 back. Thought that was interesting. But as the cattle get heavier, I always say that, not nearly as particular. When they get fat, they all bring the same price. 314 head of the bigger feeder heifers, all black, weighed $772 at $130. Then the 3 colored cattle off of them, same comparable weight. 95 head of those sorted off, weighed $774 at $128, just $2 back. So that's kind of an interesting quote there, and I'm glad that Scott McCornack from National Livestock gave me that information. We welcome all information here. Had kind of a graze out run there in Oklahoma City on Monday. You're going to see more of that in your sales in OKC West, Dodge City, places like that. How about Joplin Regional Stockyards, 5,900 head, $3 to $7 higher on all classes, and they're going to get more of the calves there too, but also in the feeder cattle, but a pretty good sale there in Joplin. How about Russell Livestock, Russell, Iowa, 3,200 head. Compared to 2 weeks ago, they've been running every other week pretty much, mostly $2 to $7 higher. So really good sale in Russell. I'm going to give you some individual quotes on them. How about Sioux Falls Regional Livestock in Worthing, South Dakota, 5,800 head, big run, mostly backgrounded feeders, and they sold mostly steady to $4 higher. How about a big time quote on a long string from Sioux Falls Regional, 209 head, 856 pound steers, bring 138 and a quarter. How about Callaway Livestock Center, Kingdom City, Missouri? My buddy Jack Harrison there, he had some big strings on that sale. How about 157 head, 626 pound steers, bring 165.50. But the best quote that I saw anywhere on Monday, and your Zactran top quote for the day, come out of Russell, Iowa, Russell Livestock, 69 head, 822 pound steers, bring 145 and a quarter. And that's your feeder flash for Tuesday.